Good evening, everyone. I'm Beth Galnick, Associate Curator here at the Art Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this talk by Dr. Tiffany E. Barber, held in conjunction with the exhibition Firelei Báez, now on view in our galleries. Many members of the Art Center's team have helped to realize this event, including our facilities, security, and communications teams. And we are immensely grateful to Jill Featherstone, Senior Director of Learning, Engagement, and Community Access, for facilitating this talk. In considering how to introduce tonight's speaker, I was reminded of a quote by Firelei Báez. Firelei asks, "How do you make someone present when history has made such an effort to erase them?" This question of presence, of how to thrive in the face of an oppression, is a central question in Báez's practice. Her response, at least in part, is inspired by her deep love for science fiction, which you can see in the books she has chosen to display at the exit to the Anna K. Meredith Gallery, particularly the works of Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler. In thinking about these writers, I've realized that they share with Báez an incredible capacity for fantastically reimagining reality, giving us access to other futures and other worlds that are, ultimately, a way to reflect on new ways forward in our own. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Barber, a prize-winning, internationally recognized scholar, curator, and critic who explores the ways in which artists imagine these futures. Dr. Barber is Assistant Professor of African American Art at the University of California, Los Angeles. Prior to joining the faculty at UCLA, she was Assistant Professor of Africana Studies and Art History at the University of Delaware, as well as Curator in Residence at the Delaware Contemporary. She has completed fellowships at Art Table, the Delaware Art Museum, the University of Virginia's Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies, and the Getty Research Institute. Her recent curatorial project, a virtual multimedia exhibition for Google Arts and Culture, examines the value of Afrofuturism in times of crisis. Dr. Barber is also the recipient of the Smithsonian's 2022 National Portrait Gallery Director's Essay Prize and author of Undesirability and Her Sisters, Black Women's Visual Work and the Ethics of Representation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barber.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Wait a minute. Hello, everyone. Hello. I love that. I skipped over it. I didn't give you time to respond, so I wanted to run that back because I love that so much. Thank you so much for being here. A huge, huge thank you to Kelly and to Jill. I want to shout out Jill, who has been managing a lot of different things and life changes and all this, and has been really, really making sure that I had everything I need in the face of other things that have been taking her attention. So just wanted to say thank you so much, Jill. You've really been an anchor for me because I have been really bad at managing my time while I've been here. So she's kept me on task, and I really appreciate that, and made sure, like I said, I was nourished and hydrated and all the things. I'm gonna talk for like 35, 40 minutes, but I'm also gonna do like a little like my teacher hat. So you'll see that I can be a little annoying as an instructor, but it's for the betterment of the group, I promise. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about my research, my teaching, and my curatorial practice on Afrofuturism, Black women, and Afrofuturism specifically, and then art histories of the African diaspora more broadly. But I'm not going to be talking the whole time. Like I said, it's going to be a little interactive in places, starting now, actually. If you have a friend that you brought with you, I'm so glad for you because this will be very easy for you. But if you are sitting next to someone that you don't know, wonderful. Please turn to them and introduce yourselves, and also talk about what you know about the term Afrofuturism. Have you heard it before? Are you just now coming to it for the first time? What do you expect to learn today? Go. Yes. Okay. I learned this trick recently, where it's like if you raise your hand, people are like, oh, easy. I'm like, are you an educator too? I love it. I'm like, I learned this trick recently where it's like if you raise your hand, especially if there are other educators in the room, they'll also raise your hand and then everybody gets quiet just like that just happened. It's amazing. I don't have to do this with my undergrads, but I do have to do it with my K through 12 when I used to teach, but I love that. Thank you. Anybody want to share a few things that you talked about, like a keyword or something that you discussed? We don't need a microphone necessarily, but I love that.
Well, it's kind of for everybody so they can hear.
Okay, yeah, shout it out or take the mic.
If you're loud, you shout. If you're kind of quiet, I'll give you the mic.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 mics already. I love it.
Yep. Anybody want to be brave? What was the word you said? Yeah, viola.
Yes.
I'm gonna come.
You can be brave and loud. I love it.
Hello. I'm curious to find out about this Afrofuturism, particularly when you have black women, in regards to black women. So I'm really, really interested in that.
Excellent.
And hope to learn a lot.
Oh, you will. I love
Oh,
that. Great.
thank you.
Yes, it's one of my focuses in my research, so yay. Yes, we have one over
hi.
here.
I'm over here.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, okay.
Hi. We talked about, we talk about stuff like this all the time. So.
Yes. Okay.
But the thing that came to mind is just sort of the concept of future, the term future and the concept of time from an Africana perspective. When we know that the future is now, the past is now. Like I'm an ancestor right now. So the idea of you just sort of toying with the idea of the linear concept of time with a term like Afrofuturism, when from an Africana perspective, time is not
Circular and
linear.
cyclical.
Yeah, it's a circle.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. One more person to discuss what you talked about with your partner.
All right. And I'm coming down here.
I'm like,
to
I
the
can't even,
front.
my eyes aren't moving fast enough.
When I think of Afrofuturism, I think about Black folks claiming prominence and dominance in the future while living in a society that wants to erase our existence.
Great, thank you so much. And one more. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, the rain woke me up at 4 o'clock this morning. So I was reading on my tablet, and I found out there's a difference between Afrofuturism and African futurism.
Correct.
And there's kind
There
of
is
an
a
important
difference.
distinction.
Wonderful, you all have done your homework. I'm very impressed. Welcome to the first day of class. I love it. And to the people who you just walked in and you were like, I'm jumping in the conversation. I love that, yes. All of the things that you talked about, I'm gonna touch on in my lecture today, so that's lovely. And then we'll come back to talking to each other about artworks, which is my favorite thing to do with my students and with people in general, is talking about art together, so yay. Okay. I began thinking about Black women's contributions to Afrofuturism in 2011 when I first saw this collage by Kenyan-born artist Wangechi Mutu, who Firelei Báez counts as one of her early influences. Mutu's work is included in the Des Moines Art Center's collection here, and Báez curated it into the exhibition as you walk to the other side, and I got a beautiful tour of that just a minute ago with Beth, so thank you so much. The title of the work by Mutu on the screen is Non je ne regrette rien, and it is from 2007. At that time, male scholars and practitioners dominated the popular and academic literature, as well as the public discourse about Afrofuturism, an aesthetic and political mode of contemporary Black expression that has gained considerable currency since its introduction in the early 90s. Frustrated with the landscape, I developed a course called Afrofuture Females, which borrows its name from Marlene S. Barr's 2008 edited anthology of Black American women's new wave science fiction writing. On the screen is the masthead to the syllabus I taught at the University of Delaware before joining the faculty at UCLA, where I now teach. Pictured at the top of the masthead are an image from singer Janelle Monáe's concept album, The Archandroid, and another cyborg collage by Wangechi Mutu. The course, now renamed Black Women's Aesthetic Futures, is often cross-listed between Black Studies, Gender Studies, and Art History, and I've taught it at 3 different institutions over the last 10 years, and it centers the voices and labors of Black women who convened online and offline to transform how we think about the future. Narrowly defined in the American context, Afrofuturist texts contain science fiction metaphors, as well as employments of technology that construct alternate worlds with regard to racial politics and belonging. Firelei Báez's work not only challenges and expands the usual aesthetics of Afrofuturism, but what also counts as American by incorporating Caribbean figures and mythologies. Robots, cyborgs, and androids, as well as interstellar adventures and time travel, all feature prominently in Afrofuturism, where visual, literary, and sonic texts also at times subvert science fiction tropes to complicate issues of racial difference and highlight representations of Blackness that are often left out of generic plots within film and literature or eclipsed altogether within the historical record. These issues and representations include the structured absence and token presence of Black characters and actors, themes of racial contamination and racial paranoia as constitutive of a post-apocalyptic future, and the marginalized Black body as the ultimate signifier of difference, alienness, and otherness. On the screen is an untitled work by Kimberly Marie Ashby, a Black and Native American queer woman artist and activist who uses found materials and hand-cut collage to reflect historically marginalized people's ability to make marvels out of the scraps they are given. This work is included in a virtual exhibition I curated in 2020 that Beth mentioned in my bio that I'll talk a little bit more about later. But for now, I want to continue to tell you a little bit more about myself and how I came to this work. I've been collaborating with many of the leading theorists and practitioners of Afrofuturism since 2012. Around this time, news reports, television sitcoms, and party politics in the US were dominated by claims of a nation beyond race, claims catalyzed by Barack Obama's 2008 presidential election. Then, in February 2012, the fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin and the subsequent acquittal of his murderer forcefully shattered post-racial illusions. Amidst a swarm of contestations and waning urgency with regard to the efficacy of visual communication and Black resistance, my collaborators and I organized a series of multidisciplinary convenings, exhibitions, publications, public forums, and other projects dedicated to imagining Black political possibility in the art of our time. This landscape is the basis for what Reynaldo Anderson and Charles Jones termed Afrofuturism 2.0, a transnational, diasporic, and cultural worldview that underscores the Pan-African spurs of Afrofuturism in order to expand its discursive reach into the areas of theoretical and applied science, metaphysics, social sciences, aesthetics, exhibition making, and other programmatic spaces in North America, South America, Africa, and Europe. Afrofuturism 2.0 acknowledges the increasing necessity to challenge a trenchant and growing wave of fascism and anti-Black sentiment. It also centers the African and African-descended cultures, intellectual traditions, and aesthetic lineages. Although Afrofuturism conceptually originated in the North American African diaspora, Afrofuturism 2.0 highlights how practitioners in and from Africa have embraced and revised the term in relation to their own geopolitical contexts and conditions, sometimes rejecting or abandoning the label Afrofuturism altogether. Yet, even within this second wave of Afrofuturist thought, I occupy a minor position, though a generative one as I see it, for articulating Black women's aesthetic contributions and the critical horizons they design and mobilize. Through their work, not only as artists, but as policymakers, lawyers, all kinds of manner of practitioner, not just in the art world. The new waves of Afrofuturism that have emerged in thought and practice in the last 15 years trouble well-worn visual and literary tropes, such as magical or mutant Black characters and interstellar travel in outer space as the ideal routes to liberation. My work is situated here. In reconstituting Afrofuturism for the 21st century, my scholarship and curatorial practice imagines ever-widening understandings of Blackness, womanhood, and futurity at the limits of life and death. This conceptual framing stems from centering Black women's voices and labors in global expressive culture, speculative thought, technology, and political struggle across time and space, reorienting the plot points for Pan-African liberation and survival under and against increasing surveillance and crisis. And with Wangechi Mutu's repeated visualizations of dismembered cyborgs, parasite host dysfunction that does not produce equitable interspecies relations, blood spatter, and remnants of violence, among other motifs that call viewers to question individual and collective desires for repair and redemption, my work has also been and always been invested in Black feminist diasporic epistemologies. Okay, another interactive moment. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie Black Panther. Okay, I'm so thrilled. I did that once and I was like, oh, 2 people. Oh, Oh, okay. I was like, cool. We're missing a few zeitgeist things. It's fine. We're good. Great. We don't have that problem here. I love that. The 2018 Hollywood release and blockbuster success of the Marvel Comics film catapulted the term Afrofuturism into the mainstream, positioning it as a form of redress. Directed by Ryan Coogler of recent Sinners fame, Black Panther is the 18th superhero film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the first Marvel film composed of a predominantly Black cast. Set in Wakanda, a lush, highly resourced promised land under the cover of a third world identity, the film posits a Black utopian space in the not-so-distant future where communities of African-descended people not only exist, but thrive. Following his father's death, T'Challa is crowned king of Wakanda and the newest Black Panther. But Killmonger, an estranged first cousin and adversary, challenges T'Challa's sovereignty with the intention of abandoning the nation's isolationist policies in favor of global revolution. This sharp contrast between characters inspired divergent criticisms of the film. On the one hand, critics praised Black Panther for its unprecedented representation of complex Black characters unbound by stereotypical casting traps. Proof, quote, to Hollywood that African-American narratives have the power to generate profits from all audiences, end quote, critic Jamil Smith proclaims. Others found the film to be regressive, full of redemptive counter-mythology concerning Africans and the African-American imagination, and, quote, a fundamentally reactionary understanding of Black liberation that blatantly advocates respectability politics over revolution, end quote, for the purposes of white comfort, as Canadian journalist James Wiltz states. Not to mention the mashup of African cultural references that comprise Wakanda, making it an amalgam rather than a place with distinctive history. Despite the film's divided reception, the fictive Wakanda in the film's predominantly Black cast solidified Afrofuturism's popularity, as well as filmic depictions of Black life in 21st century Hollywood. When cultural critic Mark Derry first used the term Afrofuturism in his off-cited essay, Black to the Future, to describe, quote, speculative fiction that treats African-American themes and addresses African-American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture, and more generally, African-American signification that appropriates images of technology and a prosthetically enhanced future, end quote. His notion engendered a troubling antinomy stemming from the idea that a shared Black past had been, quote, deliberately rubbed out, end quote, giving rise to an inexhaustible yet exhausting search for evidence to redress the trauma of this loss. At the turn of the 21st century, American scholars, cultural producers, and public intellectuals penned extensions and correctives to Derry's initial conceptualization of the term. For Ytasha Womack, Afrofuturism exists at the intersection of imagination, technology, the future, and liberation, where, quote, Afrofuturists redefine culture and notions of Blackness for today and the future by combining elements of science fiction, historical fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, Afrocentricity, and magical realism with non-Western beliefs, end quote. Alondra Nelson, Kodwa Ashun, Natrice Gaskins, and Ruth Mayer further frame Afrofuturism as a revisionist discourse in which racialized, gendered bodies use technology to reparative ends, an ethos of cosmic liberation and, quote, possibility in a world meant to destroy any and all forms of Black life, end quote, as Shantae Paradigm Smalls puts it. But Afrofuturism is about more than reclaiming the past, according to Lisa Yazek. It is, quote, about reclaiming the history of the future as well, end quote. As the term has become more mainstream, scholars and authors have looked to the canon of African American letters to extend Afrofuturism's purview. Cherie Renee Thomas's two-time World Fantasy Award-winning Dark Matter anthologies from 2000 and 2004, respectively, positioned famed sociologist and Pan-Africanist W.E.B. Du Bois as a speculative fiction writer by putting his short story, The Comet, in conversation with other Black speculative fiction pioneers and their writing. In the time since the two volumes were published, the second volume from 2004 also included a second speculative work by Du Bois, a third story of his was discovered in the archives. Thematically, within science fiction and speculative fiction novels, television, and films, the realities of captive slavery and forced diaspora are frequently linked to instances of bodily transformation and alien invasion. In Isaiah Lavender III's summation, quote, "One might argue that chattel slavery is an apocalyptic event that created Black experience in the New World as a real science fiction," end quote. For these reasons, Black cultural producers in the US and the broader Atlantic world have often turned to the spheres of speculation and the imagination to make sense of Black lived experience in the afterlife of slavery. This mode of Black speculative work celebrates the unique aesthetic perspectives that derive from fractured histories and the ongoing effects of displacement and alienation. In reconstituting Afrofuturism for the 21st century, Ronaldo Anderson defines the term as, quote, "the early 21st century technogenesis of Black identity reflecting counter-histories, hacking and/or appropriating the influence of network software, database logic, cultural analytics, deep remixability, neurosciences, enhancement and augmentation, gender fluidity, post-human possibility, the speculative sphere with transdisciplinary applications that has grown into an important diasporic technocultural Pan-African movement," end quote. Afrofuturism, in short, imagines ever-widening definitions of Blackness and prospective futures where anything can happen. Along these lines, films such as Black Panther, Get Out, A Wrinkle in Time, and Sorry to Bother You, to name a few, have been lauded as path-breaking examples of contemporary Black visual culture in the US. These media objects emerge from what Brandy Monk Payton calls an era of televisual reparations, a curative desire for positive representation fostered in the Black spectator in response to media depictions of violence against Black bodies. In the face of violence, Monk Payton writes, quote, "Blackness in contemporary television performs an alterity that speaks to the racial futures of both the medium and the lives off-screen implicated within it," end quote. The relationship between representation and visibility, both artistically and politically, holds unique purchase for artists of African descent living and working in the United States and the broader Atlantic world. Before the Civil Rights era, African Americans were excluded from the arena of US electoral politics. Thus, formal political equality and moves toward it were seen as viable remedies to centuries of Black degradation and a way to establish community. Black artistic production was integral to this political transformation. The critical reception of the aforementioned films has also cast them as quote-unquote firsts. The first superhero film with the predominantly Black cast and a Black writer-director in the case of Black Panther, for instance. This exceptionalism is seen as a victory, a marker of racial progress. And to be sure, a film like Black Panther is unprecedented in Hollywood. However, elevating the film's exceptionalism equates visibility with progress, and at the same time, erases the creative labors and contributions of those who came before. For far too long, film and media scholars Raquel J. Gates and Michael B. Gillespie explain, quote, "Both the academic and popular study of Black film and media studies has focused too narrowly on the mere presence of Black bodies both in front of and behind the camera." Alternately, Gates and Gillespie continue, quote, "Critical discussion around Black Panther and other so-called Black firsts tends to tacitly frame them in terms of a white film landscape, suggesting that their worth rests in their ability to look and sound like standard, i.e. white, films, severing their ties to Black film history and distancing them from exceptional or mundane, everyday Black films in the present," end quote. And I want to highlight here that Iowa actually is part of this Black film history. I don't know if any of you know, and Oscar Micheaux, have you heard this name before? Raise your hand. I love it. Y'all better. He homesteaded in Sioux City Falls in the early 20th century here and wrote a novel and then moved back to the East Coast and opened up a film production company and started making films that were actually pretty satirical and highly critical of Black life, or at least depictions of it intramurally. So he's also a really interesting character who's actually has an imprint in Iowa, so I wanted to highlight that. To trouble such deferrals to exceptionalism, visibility, and reparation, recent Black media studies scholarship has begun to reframe the relation between Blackness, the body, and liberation. In addition to expanding Afrofuturism's scope to encompass 20th and 21st century interventions, scholars and artists are now rethinking the term's early, narrow definition in order to interrogate the restorative justice capacities of representation and visibility. These new intellectual currents investigate the roles of surrealism and pessimism within contemporary Black expressive culture. Despite Afrofuturism no longer being bound to its original definition, the radical otherness or alterity of the concept is often elided by investments in racial redemption, exemplified by statements such as Yazik's regarding Afrofuturism's recovery impulse. What does this impulse to redeem both the past and the future in the present tell us about the relationship between Blackness, history, and memory? Very fun gimmicks in PowerPoint. I was like, oh, we're in the space age, oh my God. In response to this question of the relationship between Blackness, history, and memory, as the then visual arts curator of the Black speculative arts movement, I organized a virtual exhibition titled Curating the End of the World, which you see a screen recording of here. The movement, as an act of resistance to racialized capitalism, the Black speculative arts movement cultivates new foundations for global liberatory systems. The movement is an international network of creatives, intellectuals, and artists representing different positions and bases of inquiry that include Afrofuturism, Astro-Blackness, manga, Afro-Surrealism, Ethno-Gothic, Black digital humanities, the Black fantastic, magical realism, the esoteric, and much more. Frequently, these positions overlap around the terms speculative and design and even appear to be incompatible. Yet they often interact at the nexus of technology and ethics. The Black speculative arts movement emerged following the 2015 opening of the Unveiling Visions, Alchemy of the Black Imagination exhibition, curated by John Jennings and Ronaldo Anderson, and held at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City. The Black speculative arts movement has since become a global entity with semi-annual events regularly taking place across North America, South America, Africa, and Europe. And this exhibition really emerged out of a need and urgency to give artists a platform, artists of African descent a platform in the wake of lockdown and pandemic, anxiety and emergency. And at the time, the technology was not that great. Like, it's very kind of, as you can see from the screen recording, it's like Google Arts and Culture is kind of like flat. There's not a lot of like curatorial possibility, like in terms of exhibition design. It was just kind of like, okay, like you scroll up, but the works themselves are really dynamic and kind of exceed the container of the technology itself, which also points toward a kind of like Black ingenuity and kind of thinking at the limits of mediums and what's available to us and trying to kind of hack it. Curating the End of the World was organized in two parts, and it is currently still housed and accessible on Google Arts and Culture. And given everything that was going on in 2020, COVID-19 lockdowns, global Black Lives Matter uprisings, I wanted the exhibition to be an intervention that reflected the times, while also unsettling Western perceptions of historical process and time, to the point that was made earlier, through speculative art and design from the Black diaspora. In the face of international fascism, increasing instances of mass death and genocide, climate change, and other crises to come then and now, the exhibition is eerily prescient. The artworks in the exhibition also model in their own ways what Pan-African liberation and survival might look like now and in the future. My curtain gimmick on PowerPoint, my current work centers Black women as progenitors for present-day Afrofuturism, though my analysis is sometimes, admittedly, counterintuitive and irreverent. Lines of argumentation that follow the formal moves that a cohort of Black women artists are making in their work. My first encounter with Mutu's Non Je ne regrette rien charted new directions in my thinking about Black women's art and activism in the 21st century, the basis of my recently published book. Mutu is best known for her grotesque yet dazzling representations of hybrid figures in otherworldly environments that resonate so deeply with Báez's own work. And in these spaces comprised of photo fragments, paint, and other materials, Black and racially ambiguous cyborg women hover, suspended in motion. Formless backgrounds and impossible landscapes comprise Mutu's fantastical worlds, where images of uteri, birth scenes, cyborgs, and mother figures, such as Eve and the Madonna, proliferate. The artist repeatedly depicts wounds as signs of immediate and ongoing trauma, whether on the female bodies that populate her works on paper, in the backgrounds of her collages, or on the gallery walls of her installations. Blood spatter punctuates each composition, remnants of human and non-human encounter, where violence is both disabling and a strange form of birth. Even as they picture the results of Black women's reproductive labor, both biologically and artistically, Mutu's complex images do not proffer linear narratives that interlink the bygone with the present, nor do they seek to answer the conundrums at their core. Why or how can cyborgs also be mothers or reproductive bodies? Her artworks instead challenge our capacity to reconcile historical trauma with the desire for new and progressive forms of togetherness in the new millennium. This is her piece, Le Petit Mot, from the same 2007 series as Non Je ne regrette rien, and the intimacies she composes are the product of undesirable intercourse, all of which has profound implications for how we understand the relationship between Blackness and what scholars, climate scientists, and environmental activists have termed Anthropocenian consciousness. The Anthropocene and the apocalyptic discourse it has inspired within recent scholarly and popular writing describes the current geological period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate environmental change. The parasite-host dysfunction between disparate species and locales and Mutu's art underscore the imbalances between our present-day racial and gender realities and ecological crisis. They formally and materially refuse oneness and wholeness, a compelling blueprint for considering what tools and aesthetic strategies are necessary for navigating moments of crisis and rupture, as well as what bodies we might need to survive and persist. The subject of Mutu's Forbidden Fruit Picker, which you see here, is a female figure perched atop a barren mound between a decaying, foreboding tree, the base of which features a brown fetus turned upside down amongst a nest of disembodied hands, and a pair of serpents with a taste for blood to the right. I'll just point out because it's hard to see this. Somehow this high-res image is not as high-res as it's supposed to be. But here is this fetus turned upside down, and then of course, I never have a clicker, so I'm like, these serpents. So I'm like, yay, oh my God, look at this. So yeah, we're gonna do visual analysis later with a pointer, so very exciting. Very nerdy things happening up here. The sacred and profane come together in the sculpture come together in this collage. The title, the sacred and profane come together in this collage with the iconography representing Eve in the Garden of Eden. Front and center and filling a third of the frame, the figure in Forbidden Fruit Picker is foregrounded in such a way that her scale dwarfs the looming tree and landscape behind her. Her form is stable and immediately in view, yet she is vulnerable and suspended in motion. Her collaged body is composed of photographic fragments of human, animal, and motorcycle parts cut from magazines, a cyborg. Compositionally, Mutu's Forbidden Fruit Picker bears a striking resemblance to Giovanni Bellini's Madonna del Prato, Madonna of the Meadow of 1505, from the pyramidal structure of the female figure to the expanse of the landscape that frames her. The conflicting images and species in Forbidden Fruit Picker, however, refract Western art history's reverence for images of the Virgin Mary and Western society's disdain for unruly women such as Eve through the lens of Black women's alterity. Unlike Bellini's painting, there is no intimacy between the female figure and the child. Rather than vibrant, healthy trees that frame the protagonist and horizontal bands and diagonal lines that unify the composition's pictorial space, Mutu's use of atmospheric and linear perspective, as well as three-dimensional form, disorders any relational logic between natural forms, human forms, and non-human forms. Mutu's collages across her practice mix up where and how humanity begins and ends, as well as what it means to create, live, and exist with other beings. Creation for the artist is not a process based on the seamless and successful interdependency and interconnectedness of all life on the planet, despite the aspiration and desires for such futures. Her cyborgs embrace what curator Okwi Enwezor calls, quote, the attributes of negation and repulsion, end quote, that emerge from, quote, conflict among each competing image species, end quote, a friction that also arises in the space between fragmentation and unity. Conflict abounds in Forbidden Fruit Picker. The mechanical parts and new technologies that retrofit the human form do not appear to work well together, nor do they appear to aid the figure. And rather than the shame typically associated with Eve's transgression, the collage fixes the figure in the act of disobedience, rather than in the aftermath of when Eve and Adam are exiled from the terrestrial paradise. This dark, ominous picture of the first mother at the beginning and end of the world recasts the future promise of women's biological and creative reproduction. I don't know if you can see too here, the figure is dismembered, missing part of their lower limb. Self-assured, the forbidden fruit picker reaches for the lurid, ripe fruit hanging from the tree before her. She does not touch it, however. Even as the composition gestures toward hope and renewal, there is something very pending in this image. The figure's suspended motion draws the focus to the ambivalent relationship between aspiration and attainment. Thus, this is not a picture of successful collaboration and coalition between human, technology, environment, and other species. The birth scenes, alien mothers, and cyborgs that recur in Mutu's collages, videos, sculptures, and works on paper animate the limits of bodily trauma and collective memory during an era of techno-optimism and post-identity desire that denies and displaces ongoing racial antagonisms. In refusing to cohere into a picture of seamless or even radical togetherness, Mutu's visual constructions of dismembered bodies and inhospitable, nebulous landscapes underscore how race and gender complicate the terms of post-human, post-colonial consciousness. They also offer a new analytic for evaluating Black women's art that pictures interspecies relations, one that undermines the psychological and material underpinnings of racist and sexist thought in Western aesthetic and political discourse writ large. During the past decade of Afrofuturist development, the diasporic scope of the movement, as well as its conceptual framework, has expanded. This expansion coincides with renewed interest in intersectionality and what Black feminists thought might add to Afrofuturism. Following this trend, Martine Sims, Ruha Benjamin, and other Black women artists and scholar activists consider how the persistence of anti-Blackness in the present changes the limits of imagining outer space and cyberspace as future freedom frontiers. In the Mundane Afrofuturist Manifesto of 2013, Martine Sims declares that outer space will not save us from injustice. She and Ruha Benjamin also remind us that cyberspace was prefigured on a master-slave relationship, an outgrowth of the logic of the logic of labor extraction that undergirds capitalism and imperialism. This power dynamic is at the heart of Octavia Butler's speculative fiction, which is arguably more popular and prescient now than ever, and that text, Parable of the Sower, is one of the books that Firelei Báez chose to display as part of the exhibition, so I'm highlighting it here. Butler tousled with all manner of Afrofuturist themes throughout her life and career, some optimistic, some pessimistic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, her 1993 novel Parable of the Sower returned to the New York Times bestseller list after nearly 30 years as a blueprint for navigating the global crisis, and it's still unfolding in real time, actually. For Butler's teenage protagonist, Lauren Oya Olamina, Black communities must take root among the stars to survive. Firelei Báez's work is situated here, and I forgot to say that the cover of Parable of the Sower is also featured in one of the paintings in the exhibition, I believe. I think I'm getting that right, but anyway. Báez's work brings us back to the foundational relationship between land prospecting, empire, physical labor, and the act of visualization as a source of radical possibility with negative and positive valences and consequences. Cast within an Afrofuturist frame, her works, the artist states, quote, are propositions meant to create alternative pasts and potential futures, questioning history and culture in order to provide a space for reassessing the present. And I believe that quote is actually the epigraph to the exhibition, end quote. Notably, her renderings of the Black female body, the reproductive body, draw attention to how representation vis-a-vis painting and self-fashioning have been used to regulate race, gender, sexuality, and class in the Atlantic Western world. Okay. Based on what I've shared today, now we're back to the interactive, and your own prior knowledge, turn to your neighbor again and talk about what you see in this image. Consider things like pose, color, the work's title. Go. You're now experts. Talk. Y'all are so good. I love it. Yes. I also used to be a dancer, so I'm like, choreography. Yes, I love. I had a question here. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, yeah. Oh, we want to talk about Mutu too. Okay, I love it.
Thank you.
Great. We weren't assigned to do so, but we have now been prompted. I'm like, I love it. We are all learning together. Yes. What, do you have something that you wanted to say specifically about this or that you wanted to highlight?
Well, my mother here had noticed that one of the serpents looked like it was exploding. And I said, well, wait a minute, I don't know if I necessarily saw that. And then the other one is kind of like still hissing. And so, like, that's why I was asking if you would take that
Which
back.
one? This one is
The
exploding?
one on
or-
the bottom here, but it looked like it was exploding, but it also now looks like it's more like spitting venom.
Correct,
hissing.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, there's, the thing about this image that I love is, that I write about in my book also, in the second chapter of my recently published book, is that there is so much ambivalence in this image that it's not, you can't actually tell if this is an incursion, is the snake attacking the figure, is the snake issuing some kind of venom or poison, like what is the relationship
Yes.
between the figure, and the figure doesn't seem to be compromised by these snakes, even though they also appear to be sources of danger.
Yes. Yeah, very much. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Wonderful. This, now we're back to the the official assignment, but I love a little detour. Okay, please. Oh, yes, we have the mic. Did you want to say something about the?
About the other picture.
Okay, I love it.
Because you
I
mentioned.
love it.
They mentioned that it could be exploding, but then when you recall the movie Arrival, those creatures, they were speaking when they let out marks like that.
Okay.
So we don't know what those snakes are doing.
Correct, yes. We don't know what kind of agency they have. I love that. Are we, I'm gonna wait, because I'm like, are we ready for Olamina or no? Are we ready for her? Okay. I love it. Okay, great. Who wants to share what they talked about with their partner? Thank you. Thank y'all for going with me on this. I love it. I'm like, yay. I was telling Jill, I was like, I don't know how this is gonna land, but we're gonna go for it. So yay. Thank you so much for participating.
When I talked to my partner about this, I felt like it was an element of romance here. Like she's in a wedding gown. You can see her thigh peeking out at the top and her hands crossed in the flowers.
Oh, yes,
And the baby's
here.
breath is really what made me feel like it was wedding gown. But yeah, and she's laying on the rug, it seems like.
Right, okay.
So,
Yes.
yeah, that's kind of what I got from it.
Great, no, that's great.
I
Those are
think
great,
it's
great
very
elements.
romantic.
Indeed. Okay, I love that. Definitely a kind of ethereal, ephemeral, diaphanous feeling because of the way that the fabric of the dress is rendered. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm like, go ahead. You can just you can speak whenever you have the mic.
A little
Yes,
bit of a
thank you,
different
sorry.
perspective. So it reminded me of how a body is prepared in terms of death at a
Okay.
funeral. In terms of her being adorned with flowers
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like, I don't want to say grave clothes, but being wrapped in the lace. So that was just kind of the image that, resonated with me,
Mm-hmm.
as if her body was being prepared.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'm going to come back to that because that's also on point. Yes. Anything else? We have more images too, so we're going to get into it.
What is she overlaid on? Because it looks like some kind of tarot card or a box of something. It definitely looks layered like a mixed media piece, and I'm just trying to understand what is behind her.
Great. That is a great question, and I don't have that in my notes actually, but I will say that Báez, if you've been to the exhibition, if not, there are other pieces that are very similar where she's typically using archival maps, architectural plans, charts. So I don't know what the data is on this particular one, but does anybody else in the room know? I'm like, I love it. Jill's like, Curator Beth, do you know? I love it.
Well, we don't know exactly what this is, but we know some similar processes. Do you want to just give a little bit on that?
I think that you really covered it, that it could be an architectural diagram, it could be a map. Sometimes they're obscured, you really don't know exactly what they are, so that
Yeah.
experience of looking at it and saying like, what is that, is actually the experience that she's trying to give you.
Yeah, and I think that to draw all the things together, all the comments, which were so elucidating. Oh, we have one more. I love it. Thank you for raising your hand, because I can't see anything with these lights, child.
Yes, someone who spoke about it being romantic and possibly bridal, and then a person talked about it looking like maybe a shroud as well. So maybe that juxtaposition is what we're supposed to interpret the death, the shroud, and the bridal shroud as a commentary on matrimony.
Indeed. I mean, definitely a death and a kind of, I mean, also to the point about Black diasporic time being cyclical and circular, very similar, I mean, not unlike what's happening here too, at the end and beginning of the world, right? The first mother, but also like the kind of landscape being ominous and kind of foreboding about, where we stand in terms of crisis or upheaval or manner, like the kind of aftermath of conflict. This image also plays with opacity in an interesting way that you're all pointing out, which is not only through the kind of rendering of material, of actual fabric, but also in terms of the figure being splayed across this archival document as well as this rug, and the way that the body is shrouded and or covered or wrapped. There's a certain kind of care, of clearly a kind of ritual or some kind of preparation that's happening. And so this image actually,
Tiffany, may I just interrupt? There are two folks who did have their hand raised. Can we take those, or do you want us to wait?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna go here and then up here, okay.
Yeah, my child and I you were drawing attention to the flowers specifically, what they are kind of grounded in, and then how in the outline of the body appears to have a kind of refraction of those flowers in contrast to a sort of outer aura of the highly kind of embodied, articulated, almost shag, right? And so the question of where life force or agency was in terms of what's fueling those flowers, or what are they grounded in?
Yes, certainly coming in and out of death, in and out of visibility, for sure. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for coming, by the way. This is awesome.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, so her body is covered, and nobody really talks about how Black women's bodies are covered. Nobody really talks about how they've been desexualized and anthropomorphized forever. And so I think for me, the Black female body being covered and looking at her that way, you can't see her.
Yes, a kind of refusal. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
So that's my comment on that.
Great, yes, all of those things are true. I love it. Okay, visual analysis is very powerful, and you all are already experts. Like I said, I love it. So this, the pose, or the way that the female figure is laying, is actually inspired by an archival image that's not actually the archival image that's underneath, but is an archival image of civil rights activists and freedom fighters sleeping in church pews as they were kind of resting and preparing for their next trip or journey. And so in terms of preparation, that's very much here, a kind of resting, not necessarily a death, but certainly kind of a resting and a ritual of trying to kind of build power to restore, right, to continue to fight and wage war, basically, with forces that are trying to obliterate you. So the figure, robed in a diaphanous ruffled dress, luxuriates on a plush shag rug. The flesh is transformed into a swirling map of the cosmos, and a visage almost completely obscured by an unfolding bouquet of flowers. And this color also, we'll come back to the skin color. I want you all to note that. Nobody said anything about that. So it's like, oh, we're also in the kind of otherworldly realm, because this is not a mimetic or realistic necessarily, or naturalistic representation of flesh, right, of skin. But here the body becomes a hallowed site, as you all have noted, and the title itself is a reference to the protagonist in Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, who also must take rest before going into battle to forge this new religion and this new world as part of the Earthseed series. How many Octavia Butler fans do we have in here? Great. I love it. So you all are familiar. But in that book, which begins in the year 2024, so we're already a year into the novel in real time, 2025 now, the U.S. has grown more unstable due to extreme climate change, increasing wealth inequality, and corporate greed, drawing an uncanny parallel to our present historical moment. And so I also want to highlight that this was made in 2022, so even still 2 years anticipating kind of Butler's own predictions, if you will, that are unfolding now in real time. So, next image. We're gonna do it again. Turn to your neighbor and talk. What do you see? I love it. Thoughts? And you, yes. I'll repeat for the record.
I can just say it out loud. I got 2 points.
Great.
So this reminds me of a conspiracy theory I think is more so true. A conspiracy theory that the ocean and space are connected. The deeper you go to the ocean, you end up in space.
Okay, great. So the connections between deep space and deep sea. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Love that. Anyone else? Is anyone? Oh, okay, great. Go ahead. Ooh, yes. Hi.
I was struck by the feeling that it's both like inside a gaseous nebula and also looking into the distance at millions of others. So the internal and external aspect.
Great. Yes. So you see that motif coming in again. So the kind of suspension. Ooh.
Yeah, and actually, no, I do want to say something about
Go for
her,
it.
too. So I did see the skin from the beginning. I was like, this is like the universe embodied by this woman, and she's so uncontainable by what the people who are trying to erase her. She's pure power. Like that's what her skin spoke to me in this one.
I love that. Uncontainable. I love that because we're going to come back to that because this is a reference to some of Firelei's earlier work, and so we're going to end there actually. So I'm going to hold on to that. Thank you. Yes, over here.
So continuing on that thought about space and the sea being connected, we also chatted about this. It looks like a little creature or something of sorts here.
Here? Over here.
Yes, right there.
Yeah.
Yes. And just talking about how we as humans can only go but so far and see so much, but we know that there's more to see and we just can't get a clear view. So.
I love that. Yes.
What I noticed was that patch of red on the right. It almost
here?
looks like, that.
Yeah.
It almost looks like veins going through the water, almost like blood. Like it's not. It almost doesn't look like it's supposed to be there.
Great.
It looks like it's like trailing through the water in a pattern that you don't see anywhere else in the image.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It looks like it's like almost like staining it. Like it's not supposed to be there, but it's not going anywhere either.
Great. So there are actually figures embedded in this image. So going back to the kind of palimpsestic, layered approach that Firelei Báez continues to kind of innovate in her work. This painting is a response to, does anyone know Drexia? I love it. I love that the hands are getting less and less and less, but listen, you're still rocking with me, so I'm here for it. This painting is a response to the subequeous Afrofuturist mythology developed by the Detroit-based electronic music duo Drexia that was active in the 1980s and 1990s. And when you go to the exhibition, you'll see the Drexian room that Firelei Báez has constructed. But these paintings, actually, this series, I think, predates that installation. There are a number of these, I think maybe 8, somewhere between 5 and 8 of these untitled Drexia works that she made in 2020. And the illustrated liner notes accompanying Drexia's techno albums describe an underwater community populated by a new generation of water-breathing humans, the unborn children of pregnant African women who were thrown off of or who jumped from slave ships and adapted to breathe fluid within their mother's wombs. So there's a kind of, like, not only are there actual bodies embedded in, and you can see here too, there's an arm and a head here, but also an entire world, a Black Atlantic empire that's underwater. And Báez is expanding upon Drexia's counter-narrative, opening up the inherited story of this transatlantic slave trade to alternative interpretations and generative possibilities. And so with these kinds of moves that are layered atop maps and analog technologies that sought to and continue to seek to categorize and colonize bodies and land, Baez's pours and pools of paint remind us that space cannot be thought or imagined without modern technology. And you can really see that layering and underlying analog technology here in this image, as well as the previous image. And you also see the wave-like washes of color that completely cover the canvas in Baez's Drexia paintings that also actually come before. She's starting to already play with that here, but you can still see the archival image underneath the map or the plan for a sugar refinery, actually. So such technology and the relationship between deep space and deep sea cannot be thought without race and oppression, and we already see a kind of development of space law, and the technologies of colonization that we've lived with and have been the product of are already being replicated in space now, space as we know it, and even deep sea with, the more billionaires are able to build submarines and go down, and I mean, so thinking about that kind of like Columbus explorer identity and how Baez is drawing attention to that, but also subverting it by centering Black women and mythological characters and creatures. But just as deep space figures such technology cannot be thought without race and oppression, which raises more questions about who owns the means of production for Black autonomy and freedom in the future. And just as deep space figures prominently in Afrofuturist texts, the deep sea delineates an alternative habitat for Black being. Drexia created a sonic and visual world of watery synth chords and aquatic-inspired song titles that imagined a Black Atlantic empire deep in the ocean's trenches. Following Drexia, Baez conjures a future below where underwater marronage and other fugitive practices transmute the darkness and death of the transatlantic slave trade. Most notably, and this is a very, very early one, her fixation on chihuapas, the mischievous and feral female characters that exist in Dominican Hispaniola folklore, serves to undermine the organized documentation of human migration and trade patterns. Again, this is, I don't have an image of it, but you can see it kind of here too. There's this blueness that recurs that is here, again, the kind of flesh, and a lot of her siquapas are also rendered in these kind of, in the blue flesh, because in the folkloric mythology, the siquapa is dark-skinned, sometimes blue or black-skinned, and has feet that face backwards. This one doesn't, but feet that face backwards that make it untraceable, and it lures men into the forest and is kind of this, foreboding, alluring figure. But to go back to the comment about the uncontainable Black female figure, or the Black kind of worlding that's happening here, is also very early on. This is from 2009. So, to close, and then we'll go into Q&A if you still have more questions for me, but from distant galaxies to the ocean's depths and beyond, space is a defining feature of Afrofuturism. To upend how the traumas of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism continue to organize our sociopolitical present and future, Black makers and thinkers have long looked to space, outer space, inner space, cyberspace, below space, for more amenable geographies and species, safety, room to grow, and places to hide and flourish. Baez's work in this vein prompts us to consider, what kinds of bodies do we need to survive trauma, crisis, upheaval, and catastrophe that is cyclical? Whether consorting with aliens, repurposing oppressive technologies for better ends, or inventing new worlds, how we face and answer this haunting question could be a launching pad for collective liberation. Thank you.
Wow, can you just be like teacher in residence here at the museum? That would be incredible. Audience, do we have any further questions for Dr. Barber? Oh, down here, okay. I'm gonna sneak through here.
Yeah, I hope I say this halfway well. It's a question, and it's not an answer I'm looking for, okay? But is the palette of African-American speculative art, would it be different than perhaps the more general, the more mainstream culture? Would there be more colors I'm more likely to see more often?
Oh, you're talking specifically about color choices in Afrofuturist works? Or is there you're saying that is there a distinction between?
I'm talking about just the colors I will see.
Yeah.
You know, I'm seeing a lot of rich purples, a lot of rich blues, a lot of dark colors.
Yes.
But that's just looking at a few pieces.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you, I don't know.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify the question. I have an answer for you.
Okay.
So there, in the Báez exhibition in particular, there's a piece that is highlighting the indigo trade and the color, the kind of deep blues and purples that you're pointing out that are present in the artworks that I showed today, but also very much in the exhibition. They are. The indigo trade has a really long history, and it's not just unique to the continent of Africa, although there is a kind of Western African context for this, but also Japan. And so indigo dyed fabrics and things like that, and that also, the dyeing and trading of those dyes, or the circulation and migration of those dyes, are connected to imperialism, absolutely, and cultures encountering each other and trading and or forcing each other to trade and to subjugate them. And so that's how this indigo has kind of moved around. The other color palette I would say that isn't necessarily present here, but is absolutely Black liberation colors, which are red, green, and black. And so although not the same, there is also reference to the Black Panther as an icon in the exhibition. In one of the pieces, Lignon, that you come to as soon as you enter the exhibition, the white and blue painting that's actually not figurative. It's one of the, I think, few that doesn't actually picture a figure. But it's kind of this draping fabric that's painted, or this painting, and so and Firelei has made the patterning to feature the Black Panther, which is actually rendered in blue, and also has another kind of larger, broader significance about that locates anti-imperialist struggle, that the Panther, in the Black Panther context, in the Oakland context from the 1960s, is actually a Black Panther, but that also migrates to India and Mumbai with the Dalit Panthers and transforms. And so there's all of these kind of like, as you are already pointing out, like not only a color palette that's recognizable, but it's also that migrates and gets signified upon depending on the group that takes it up. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Anybody right here while I'm here? Coming down to you, sir.
Yeah, a bit of a follow-up on that. When I was looking at the Báez exhibition, I was noticing, at least from my perspective, there was some clear color reference to sacred powers such as the orishas, right? Of yellow and blue, Yemaya, Oshun, and things like that. And so I'm curious, taking that as being part of the exhibition, have you seen trends toward that kind of Orisha religious signification within Afrofuturist art?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because, yeah, I mean, the deities, the Orishas that you named are water deities, right? Yemaya is ocean and Oshun is river and the kind of smaller bodies of water, but certainly throughout, I mean, I'm like trying to think of a specific artists that's not coming top of mind, but there are, especially not just in the U.S. context, I want to highlight that there's, artists, particularly women artists of African descent in the Caribbean, in Brazil, on the continent that are using that imagery and that color, those color symbolisms in their work to tell the story of Black resistance. And in terms of like not only spiritual mythology, but spiritual practice that has persisted through and past after the rupture of the transatlantic slave trade. And so it's also about kind of, even in terms of thinking of Afrofuturism as its own kind of technology, to kind of look back to this past, do a kind of Sankofa moment, and really like reclaim that technology for the present. So yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry I don't have artist names at the top of mind, but when I figure them out, I'll send them to Jill and she can send it to the listserv.
All right, Jill, we see you over there. Caleb will come down.
I had a question. You had mentioned at the top kind of around Du Bois and around psychology, and when I think about double consciousness and the way that the artists are approaching the work, and then African futurism and Afrofuturism, can we talk a little bit about liberation and how that's actually possible when you have that type of deep, long history of the psychology that's always at play in the making process?
I'm like, that is a big old question. I think the first way I would answer it is that obviously liberation we haven't achieved it yet, so there's that. But in terms of double consciousness, I would say that something that I talk about in my own book is a kind of triple consciousness, actually, that is coming out of a longer tradition of Black feminist epistemologies. That's understanding the Black female body or the Black female identity, Black female identities in the plural, as this intersectional phenomenon between race, gender, sexuality, class, that lends itself and kind of engenders a triple consciousness that requires a certain kind of knowledge, but also nimbleness with how to move in the world. I wanted to also, part of the reason why I was bringing up these Drexcia works is also kind of marronage and fugitivity as a current preoccupation that I think is very necessary for this time. And I think if we have any hope of liberation, we have to turn to those kinds of technologies where folks were actually going off grid, liberating themselves or emancipating themselves and creating communities that were under the cover of night or in swamps or these kind of more to go back to Mutu, these inhospitable landscapes that are not necessarily nobody would generally think as fit for living, but we transform and continue to persist, even in terms of the ocean, right, the deep sea. I think in terms of practicality, because I also hear a kind of pragmatism in your question, or how do we locate pragmatism? One of the thinkers that I am moved by in Afrofuturism as a theory and as a practice is Rashida Phillips, who, with her creative partner, Kame Devstar? I'm like, what is Kame's last name? Mother, who's also a musician, and they have this collective called Black Quantum Futurism, but what informs that work is Rashida's own employment as a public housing lawyer and activist and advocate in Philadelphia, where you're thinking with Black and brown families who are constantly subjected to state-sanctioned violence through evictions, through exorbitant amounts of, what do you call those? Fines. Yeah, I'm like, what are the fines? Another word for fine, but yes. And kind of, exploiting that vulnerability. And her posing to the collective, like, what does future look like? I think this was a question early on when we started talking about, like, what do you hope to learn today? Or how do you think about Afrofuturism? It's like, how do you define futurity when you're worried about whether or not your lights are going to be on, or when you get home from your third job and you have an eviction notice on your door? Like, what do you, like, that kind of condensation of time is not suitable to a kind of expansive liberation that we might think of as a kind of privileged position, right? So we have to be thinking on these multiple levels. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Well, everyone, can we please thank Tiffany? I know.
Thank you.
We already have so many gifts that Firelei has given us with her work, and now we have another layer to add on to the appreciation of her work. So thank you all for coming. We'll put a QR code up on the screen if you wouldn't mind taking a short survey for us. That really helps us. Thank you for visiting.
Thank you so much. This was such a treat. I'm so, grateful.